And I believe that I did some good for the city, that I did make a positive difference for the city that I truly love, particularly during the pandemic.
The government of Canada itself has said, for example, that you can't get back in the country if you go anywhere without proving that you've been vaccinated twice. At least you can't get back in without avoiding quarantine. You have places like Seneca College saying, if you're going to be on campus, we need you to show us that you've been vaccinated. We have some businesses that have begun to say this. And to me, this is not at all about politics. It is not about philosophy. I have no philosophical. I'm very much in favor of people's privacy rights being respected. But the bottom line is that if there are people, including governments out there, who are going to ask you to show that you've been vaccinated or not as a means of just a practical means, then the government, the same government, the provincial government in this case, has to provide something to people to be able to show they've been vaccinated.
And again, people who don't want to go to a restaurant and have to show a vaccination proof to eat indoors can eat at home. People who don't want to show proof of vaccination to go to a baseball game or some other kind of a theater to see a movie, they can watch it on TV.
Warning, censorship.
What's the story, Mr. Tory? Well, it would certainly appear that this John Tory story is less PG and far more XXX. And hey, one of those X's is part of Mr. Tory's new whiz-bang job resume. Namely, he is now the ex-mayor of Toronto. Indeed, on Friday night, Tory made that shocking announcement that he was resigning. Alas and alack, it turned out that this uber-righteous man who portrayed himself as Hogtown's moral compass during the COVID-19 scamdemic, well, alas, he was not all that very moral himself. You see, during the height of COVID, when we were all hunkering down under threat of fines or even imprisonment, it turns out that John Tory was having a prolonged sexual fling with City of Toronto staffer Emily Hillstrom.
During the pandemic, I developed a relationship with an employee in my office in a way that did not meet the standards to which I hold myself as mayor and as a family man.
That's a wee bit of a problem, given that Tory has been married to Barbara Hackett for almost 5 decades now. Babs is a very resourceful woman, by the way. You might recall that she miraculously found a hairdresser to take care of her lovely locks when everyone else in the city resembled the cast from Hair due to barbershops being forced to shutter. But I digress. Well, actually, I do not digress all that much, really, because when one looks at the timeline of Tory's extramarital affair, it dovetails precisely with the worst COVID-19 lockdown protocols that was endured in Toronto in 2020 and 2021. And it now looks like there were 2 sets of rules being enforced, namely one set for the great unwashed masses and another set for the anointed elites. You recall the drill. We were all ordered to wear useless face diapers. Mom-pop businesses were forced to close their doors. Oh, but not the big guys, ranging from Walmart to the LCBO, mind you. Science, you see, or maybe it was a matter of membership has its privileges, as the old American Express tagline goes. And, of course, we were endlessly told to socially distance, stand 2 meters away from one another to avoid the transmission of those COVID cooties. And yet, while all this was being pronounced and enforced by His Honour Mayor John Tory, well, Johnny himself was horizontally jogging with Hillstrom, who, by the way, is some 37 years his junior. Hey, I guess the heart wants what the heart wants, but can someone please explain how social distancing is achieved when, you are so close to a subordinate that the end result is actually the exchange of bodily fluids? And how is it that as Torontonians collectively suffered under draconian coronavirus rules that really had no effect on curbing the virus, Mayor Tory took the opportunity to reinvent himself as Casanova and was able to skirt those rules while skirt chasing? Let me guess, was this yet another example of that prevailing COVID-19 mantra? Namely, one law for me, one law for thee. Do as I say, not as I do. Got it. But now that the wicked truth has been revealed about how John Tory was behaving behind closed doors, it turns out that karma really is something that rhymes with witch, because as his right honourable mayor made life miserable for Torontonians, John Tory himself just couldn't keep his John Thomas from popping out of his polyester pants. And no, Mr. Tory, we haven't forgotten how horrible you were during the height of the pandemic. Remember how this mayor fenced off High Park, Berlin Wall style, to prevent citizens from smelling the cherry blossoms? I'm not making this up, folks. Check it out. Officer, your colleagues couldn't tell me what law is closing the King's Highway to taxpayers. And you know, folks, the irony is staggering. I had a viewer pass on this image. This is Pyongyang, North Korea. As you can see, they have cherry blossom trees just like Toronto. But guess what? Dictator Kim Jong-un, he didn't wall off the parks in North Korea like John Tory did in Toronto. So let that sink in for a few seconds. Yeah, we the people couldn't sniff those cherry blossoms, while at the same time John Tory was apparently inhaling the sweet scent of, I don't think I'll go there, actually. And the social distancing dumbness would only continue. Consider Trinity Bellwoods Park. Tory had bylaw paint some 800 so-called social distancing circles on the lawns of Trinity Bellwoods. The idea is that park visitors had to stay in their own little circle and stay away from others. Wow, sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it? And once again, folks, I'm not making this up. Well, folks, I've returned to the scene of Toronto's Day of Infamy. You may recall last Saturday, about 10,000 people crammed into little Trinity Bellwoods Park. And, well, needless to say, the elected officials, they lost their marbles over this. The likes of Premier Doug Ford and John Tory. You know, the same elected officials who break all the COVID-19 protocol they say that we should be following. NFL rules or CFL rules for a fair catch? If I put one foot out, is that considered a violation, or do I have to keep both inside the circle?
Well, I think you're supposed to be using some common sense, and I would really appreciate that not being so close to my face, please.
Well, we're 6 feet away.
I understand that, and you're holding it less than 6 feet away from your mouth, which can contaminate me. So I would like that further away from my face, please, sir.
You're not going to give me one of those $880 tickets, are you?
Well, if you don't comply with what I ask you to do, then that may be a possibility right now, right?
I'm not confining you. You can keep walking away.
No, I can't, sir, because my job is to answer your questions and educate the public.
Okay, well, that's what I came here for, to get educated. So I'm wondering if I put 1 foot out or like a pinky toe out, would I get an $880 ticket?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question right at the moment.
Well, then how can you educate me if you don't know the answers?
That's a very good question.
Oh, incidentally, while law-abiding tax-paying citizens were being treated like petulant little brats, such was not the case elsewhere in Trinity Bellwoods Park. You see, a filthy tent city encampment had sprung up under John Tory's watch. It was completely illegal, breaking perhaps a dozen sections of the Trespass Act. And as we discovered the hard way, some of those tents housed dangerous people and dangerous animals for that matter. Check out the video evidence.
Please move. Move. I don't like myself being filmed. You don't have the right to actually smash that camera right now. I wouldn't do that. I have the right to smash that camera. Hey, don't do that. By law, I have the right to smash that. You have the right to smash that camera by law? Yeah, by law, you know I have to smash that camera. What law are you quoting? Punched the cell phone out of my hand.
You know, folks, once upon a time, before my beloved Hogtown became a so-called sanctuary city and the rule of law was ignored, Peter Ustinov described Toronto as, quote, a kind of New York operated by the Swiss, end quote. Alas, these days, with crime running rampant under Tory's ineffective watch, Toronto has devolved into a kind of New York as operated by the Haitians. And from the sublime to the ridiculous, Mayor Casanova stealing an idea from wackadoodle Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, even got preachy to us in terms of how we should eat our meals. Check it out.
Mayor Tory says that when the restaurants do open for sit-down dining, he wants diners to wear the mask in between bites of their dinner and sips of their drinks. Now, I'm not making this up, folks. That's what he said. I reached out to city spokesman Don Pete. I asked, is this a prank or something? And, well, Mr. Pete said this to me, quote, "I think that would be an incorrect interpretation of what he said." Okay, well, what exactly did the mayor say? Check out this clip from CP24.
Whenever we're able to bring back indoor dining, wouldn't it make sense if customers had to wear masks unless they are actually eating or taking a drink? Steve says you see people hanging out and talking with masks off and not actually eating or drinking. Tough to enforce.
And you know, Steve, well, it is, but not so tough for the restaurateur to enforce. And a lot of them were trying very hard to do that. But that's the kind of thing, in my contemplation, that we may have to look at as people will call it fine tuning. But on my doors open safely kind of approach, that's the kind of thing that you may have to say, which is you're going to be a little more stringent about when people have to wear a mask, which is aside from the fact when you're taking a sip or when you're taking a bite, you have the mask on. So while you're waiting for your food, while you're looking at the menu, all those times you keep it on, and it is going to be incumbent upon the restaurateurs.
Yeah, I think Mayor Tory is saying mask up between bites and sips.
You know, folks, I wonder if John Tory kept his mask on as he was getting up close and personal with Emily Hillstrom during the pandemic, giving new meaning, I guess, to the term safe sex. In any event, as Tory shagged his mistress, you and I were forbidden from eating at Mom and Paul restaurants. Remember how Tory and his sidekick, Dr. Eileen Davila, literally sent in all the king's horses and all the king's men to shut down Adamson Barbecue and put its owner, Adam Skelly, out of business? Remember that weird wickedness? Despicable, but it was all for our safety, folks. Oh, by the way, just 400 meters down the road from Adamson Barbecue is a Costco superstore. And get this, Costco's food service facility never closed, not even for a single hour during the pandemic. Gee, I wonder why. Let us not also forget that under John Tory's watch, that the right to protest and freedom of the press also took a kick to the gonads. Check out this highlight reel, or is it a low light reel, from young Dundas Square.
It's not an essential reason.
I don't. Why don't I have the right to speak what's on my heart?
Mainstream media has decided to sit this one out. Nothing to see here, folks. This is Toronto. This is not North Korea.
You're infringing on my rights. You are infringing on my rights.
Officer, why are these protesters not allowed to protest and people like you took the knee for Black Lives Matter in the summer?
I'm not going to leave a communist country to my kids or anyone else's kids.
I know the mainstream media is not here because they probably support censorious thugs like you.
I know people need to see this. People need to see this.
If you don't give an ID, that'll be obstructing. You can't be arrested for that.
That's fine. I've always wanted to go to jail.
So are you saying that media is not exempt? Can you say that on camera? Media is not exempt?
Media is exempt, but it's like CP24 and stuff like that, right?
Let's step back.
Our ancestors fought and died so that we could be free.
Yeah, waving a Canadian flag or asking impolite questions in what is literally the town square was deemed to be intolerable and unsafe behavior during the pandemic by Mayor Tory. And it was horrifically shut down via police as though Toronto was, I don't know, Havana or Tehran. And yet all this time, Tory and his mistress were taking part in Naked Twister. What chutzpah, what sheer unmitigated gall. And really, this is what makes the John Tory, Emily Hillstrom affair so downright sordid. It's not just because Tory is a married man. It's not because he slept with a subordinate employee, which is apparently a huge HR no-no these days. Rather, this man was so sanctimonious to the people of Toronto and was so quick to use law enforcement to enforce his tyranny, yet all the while behind the scenes, Tory, like a true tyrant, was breaking all those pandemic rules himself. So much for leading by example. As for an epilogue, in the department of Don't Cry for Me, Argentina, while Tory is no longer Toronto mayor, he now has far more time to visit his multi-million-dollar Florida mansion or travel abroad with or without his wife. And as for Emily Hillstrom, she's failed upwards, it would appear. Granted, Emily is no longer employed by the City of Toronto, but that's okay. You see, given how the Old Boys Network operates in Hogtown, Emily now has a lucrative gig just down the street from Toronto City Hall. She's now gainfully employed at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. That's the very same corporate Leviathan that is co-owned by Rogers Communications. And yes, that's the very same company that John Tory continues to be involved with. Tory sits on the Rogers Family Trust board, making about 6 figures a year. No conflict of interest to see here, folks. Move along, move along. So let that be a lesson for future John Tory mistresses. If you get caught red-handed engaging in some extracurricular hanky-panky, Johnny Boy will take care of you easy peasy. But I wonder what Hillstrom will be doing at MLSE to earn her lucrative salary. I mean, does she actually know anything about hockey or basketball or football or soccer? Maybe she can be a cheerleader for the MLSE-owned Toronto Argonauts. Opportunities abound, if you have the right connections, that is. As for you, Mr. John Tory, you have finally proven yourself to be what we all speculated you were during the pandemic. You're a liar, a grifter, a cheater, a loser, and a scoundrel. And to think you had the utter audacity to tell the rest of us how to live our lives during the pandemic under threat of imprisonment? Are you kidding? Oh, folks, if only the Walk of Atonement, as depicted in Game of Thrones, was actually codified into Canadian law for Mr. Tory.
Shame. 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 Shame.
For Rebel News, I'm David Menzies. Well, folks, that's the example of a monologue you'll never see in the mainstream media. They supported big-time lockdowns and crackdowns and imprisonment of violators. But as you saw from the video evidence, we were out in the field. We were compiling the evidence, but we need your help. Can you please go to rebelfieldreports.com? That's rebelfieldreports.com. And if you're able to, kindly help out